We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration.
Our special guest today is Joe Davis, a managing director and senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group, Why do I always say BSG? BCG. All right. Our special guest today is Joe Davis, a managing director and senior partner at Boston Consulting Group, BCG. He oversaw BCG's operations in the US, Canada, and Mexico, and was recognized as one of the top 25 consultants of the year in 2011. In his book, The Generous Leader, Joe tells a story about a performance review from early in his career where his mentor identified his key strength. Joe was a person who could connect with anyone. This ability to connect with people became the foundation of a successful career at BCG, spanning more than 35 years. For more than 3 decades, Joe's passion for people and his desire to support their development inspired teams to work harder and better than they thought possible. Joe appreciates the generosity of his loving family, Sarah, his wife for more than 40 years, his 4 children and their partners, and 8 grandchildren and counting. When he's not traveling the world for work or with his family, you can find Joe running or gardening as his moving meditation. What I appreciate most about you, Joe, is your commitment to serving others and for writing The Generous Leader to share practical ways that all of us can give of ourselves for others' benefit. Welcome to R.O.G.
Thank you. Thank you for that very nice introduction.
Yes, well, thank you for being here and for sharing your precious time with us. I would love to hear a little bit about your background. Where do you come from?
Where do I come from? I come from, that's an interesting question. I come from the West Coast. I was born in California, grew up between California and Seattle. My mom grew up in Waitsburg, Washington, which is wheat country, wheat land. So they're big farming family. Spent my time there. Then I spent 6 years at Procter and Gamble after college, and then went to school out east and stayed on the coast working for BCG for many years.
That's fantastic. And what led you to writing a book on generous leadership?
Well, first off, I believe. You just define generous leader almost the way I do. I use my phrase is someone who gives of themselves freely without expectation of direct personal benefit so that others can develop, grow, and thrive at their full potential. Now, I'll be careful, we can go long into that, but I actually think that type of leadership, for many reasons, is now demanded of all of us, above our people. And in particular, I'll just be very brief. Work life is blurred, started with the BlackBerry, went right through COVID, and now you cannot leave your human self just at home, because I think both of us actually looks like we might be at home. Your home is your work is your home, and that even started before COVID. That put it over the edge. So people really want to see a human leader, a leader who's there connecting with them. And of course, along the way, more important, no matter what, helping them to grow and develop. And so, what led me to read, my experiences, it's a funny thing because, as you know, you write a business book and not very many sell, except I thought, well, I can put my voice out there my way. Brené Brown can talk to millions and, different people can Bill George can talk to them, but each one of us are touching a different set of people with this theme. And if I can move a handful of people, I'll move my handful of people.
Exactly. Yeah. And to give people some practical advice and guidelines on how could I be a more generous leader. It sounds compelling, right? Of course, I would think, wouldn't everybody want to be a generous leader? But some of us might question how, what do I do? How can I do that? So I think your book is very practical because you give categories of how to do that. And so your first chapter is on communication. And I don't know about you, but every performance review or engagement survey will indicate that communication is the number one challenge for people. How would you suggest people generously communicate?
Well, I guess there's 2 points. Actually, I was going to say, side note, my daughter, when she read whatever draft, said, "Oh, Dad, this is," and she's 32, works in a business world. She said, "Dad, this is very good because you actually give me ideas on something I can do," which I also, because I'm
Yeah,
known to be kind of a practical guy. Some books are very theoretical. This one is, here's what you can
practical.
do. Take one of these 4 ideas. When you say that, when you use the word communication, I think there's two comments I would make. First, you need to listen. You need to know where people are coming from. You need to understand what they know that you don't know. We can go deeper in that. And then, through communication, I think even more than in the past, people want you to connect personally and deeply, as best you can. So that's, I'm thinking when I say I communicate, really work to connect personally and deeply. And I'll tell a story. You might ask how Joaquin Duato, CEO of J&J, he's actually known to, 100,000 person place or whatever, he's known to, connect pretty well. Now it's all through Zoom and town halls and all that, of course. It's a big company. But he told me something. He says, Joe, he used this thing, friend testing and group testing. I'll use the group testing example. He said, if I'm going to give a speech or a talk to a group of people, I'll call a small group in and practice it. And then I'll say to them, okay, what did you hear me say? And, he may have said pencil and they heard pen. Or, he may have said effectiveness and they heard layoffs. And then he'll sit there and write down, well, I thought I was saying this and they heard, I'll use their words. Or he'll say, if you go home tonight and tell your family Joaquin gave this talk, tell me what you would tell your family around the dinner table. And it was a very powerful, and then he would literally take notes and adjust his talk so that they could actually hear him, as opposed to him hearing himself. I thought that was very clever about in the sense of communication, you're actually communicating to what they actually hear as opposed to what you think you want to say. And I presume you're saying something you want them to hear. So you want to say it so they hear. Otherwise, why you're wasting everybody's breath?
Yeah, what a brilliant idea to, and I'm sure some people hear that and think, well, that's a great idea, but that's now 3 times the amount of time I would need to prepare. But I think when it's important, then preparation is so critical. And why bother if you're going to communicate in a way that isn't going to be perceived with the intention that you had?
Yeah, I won't even add to that because that's exactly when you said that. My thing, well, wait a minute. If it's that important, then it can't take too much time prepared. I don't understand the point.
Yeah.
And actually, the other point of that is if you don't connect with them, then you're going to have to do it again and again. You're not going to get your result. And that's really a waste of time.
Absolutely. And you think about the lost time with the perseveration and the not understanding what was said. Like when you says effectiveness and somebody hears layoffs. That kind of
That's a big
swirl
deal.
could be, I can't even imagine what that costs, both like emotionally, mentally, physically, everything. That's incredible. So when you're talking about communicating generously, you're saying listen. And I do want you to double click on that because I think listening is so critically important. And then you also talked about connecting with people personally and deeply.
Yeah, yes. And then, you mentioned, I don't like to talk about the book all the time, but, you mentioned, like I'll say things practically, use tools that I don't like Slack, but BCG teams use Slack. Got to learn how to use Slack. I don't like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Or, and there's just so many different tools you can use. And the other thing you do have to think about, well, I said, you don't want to tell a major message 3 different times. Usually there's a 3 times rule. The first time they heard the words, but they wonder what you're on about. The second time they're thinking about what happened last night at home. They ain't listening. The third time they probably heard you, with the key thing. So there's just little tricks that all of us use to communicate. But I think the most important thing is trying to connect with where they are. Then they actually can hear, internalize it, and you get the value.
Yeah.
If I may, I'm going to say one thing. It's just someone asked me once, well, we're a generous leader, but is that all about the heart? Is it all about being nice? And I think, the one thing we can't forget is, a leader does have to get results. They do have to drive outcomes. If they don't, they won't stay in the job. And that's not the objective. But, but the quote unquote generous leader or heart-led leader or whatever, they understand that the only way to get the exceptional results are through the teams. And then you start to get into my traits or somebody else, but this point about how you connect. But it's
Yes.
not to say it's all about just being nice. That's, being
Yeah,
nice.
that's That's an important clarification because I think it is one of those words that people could misunderstand. I think it is similar to empathy or compassion or vulnerability,
Yes.
where, when you understand what that feels like to work with someone and partner with someone who's demonstrating those things, you know how powerful that is and how it builds trust and it makes not just team strong, but it makes like relationships that are long lasting, like long beyond your time together as a team potentially. So I'd love to get your reaction to how sometimes these words, we get it and we think, don't you understand, generous leader? But some might view it as soft or maybe even nice in an ineffective way.
Yeah. Well, I repeat you a little bit. Actually, I was listening to some of your podcasts the other day, and you made the point. First off, generosity doesn't mean higher paychecks. Of course, pay people fairly and pay them well. I'm a believer in that. But that's a little bit. That's quite a different point. It's really, as we both just said, enabling them to be all they can be. Because then, they're performing at their best. I made the point not for your own personal gain, but it's pretty obvious. If the whole team's humming, you, the leader, are humming. You
Yeah.
know, but I was, maybe this is too personal, not personal, but I was running the West Coast for BCG, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, and made a dramatic turn while I was there, which is not important. But, someone at BCG always measures ourselves on, okay, how did you do? And if you're a leader, how'd your team do? I was on the committees that reviewed ourselves, but when the committee reviewed me, they came back and said, Joe, it's great. You drove performance, but wow, your whole team performed better. And that was more of a compliment than whatever I did,
Sure.
which is pretty important because, of course, they're why the West Coast did better, but actually them doing better, my firm recognized, oh, Joe is better. I mean, it was so
Mhm.
there is personal gain. It just can't be the motivation because then you get a little sideways.
Yes.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
that's a
if I
really
answered
great
the original
distinction.
question.
Yeah, no, it's important, and I think it's similar to why does diversity matter? Well, diversity matters because it matters. It also matters because that's how you get a high performance team. That's how you get results. So, whatever metric you're looking for, I mean, you're going to get greater results when you have diverse organizations and teams where people actually feel like they belong so that you get the benefit of them being unique and different. I know you've invested a lot of your time and energy in your career on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd love to get your thoughts on how that pays dividends too.
Well, actually, I'll tell you a funny story. The other day, my son called me up and he read that chapter in my book. Now, the book came out a while ago, so it took him, and he said, geez, Dad, I finally got it. Because, people talk about, and he's a good kid. He has his own business, it's very successful. He said, people talk about diversity, but you're actually saying it's also good for business. Yes, Andrew. So you and I both probably believe in our hearts diversity is good because it's the right thing to do. Not enough alone in the business world. So then you can be practical. Well, if you're in the pharmaceutical business and there's drugs that certain groups of people need more than other, if you aren't connecting to that group of people, you're missing opportunity. So that's very, but that took a while for U.S. business to catch on to.
Yeah.
But then more importantly, the point you've just said, and there have been studies by BCG, by McKinsey, all the consulting firms and the investment banks, interestingly, on the power of when you have a more diverse C-suite and a more diverse team, actually in a corporate environment, your results are higher. Your return
Hmm.
on, all those numbers actually perform better. And then I think, I don't have data proof on this, but if the team is more diverse, you just know there's more creative and interesting and different ideas that will come out.
Yes.
And then you can all pick them apart and figure out what's the best insight. But you have
Hmm.
a more diverse and rich set of inputs to develop that, whatever output you want.
Yeah.
So
And I read a study recently that was around gender diversity, and the ratio, like the target ratio is 50-50. And that I also like that because it's not saying you should have more than whatever, like you should really strike this balance of having like good fair mix of individuals of all different kinds of demographics. And so I like that because I think sometimes we think, oh, well, then the pendulum should swing so far this other way. And it's like, no, what if we were just
right.
more inclusive? And in your book, you talk about generous inclusion and you talk about inviting collaboration and showing respect. So love to get your thoughts on
Yeah.
what generous inclusion means.
Yeah. So on that one, actually, I mean, because you can hear the word inclusion and think diversity as we're talking. Here I'm talking about something a little different, which especially if you're the leader, it's important to bring in inputs from those other than just your little team or your cronies or whatever. I don't want to use that word, but your own people that are around you that always tell you whatever they want to tell you. And I interviewed a bunch of executives for this book, and I would you know, like reach down to someone 4 levels down who did the analysis and bring them to the meeting and then call on them. Otherwise, they're scared to death to talk and they'll still be scared, but it's not, they'll learn. But call on them and get the facts from them as opposed to filter through 3 layers of management. No,
Mm-hmm.
all the layers of management. And or, bring in different departments or different, if you're having a meeting about how we're going to move product, you don't have you have the supply chain guy, but they're not the warehouse person. Bring the warehouse person in the room. So you bring a more inclusive group than your own team. Again, it's obvious. It brings in a more diverse set of ideas and opinions and what's really going on. Now, to your earlier point about, well, does it take time? Is it hard? Sure, it takes time, but it doesn't take that much time to invite them. But you're gonna have to think a little bit about asking them questions and bringing them in the room, and they may throw stuff at you you're not ready for.
Yeah.
But that's being a leader. I don't.
Yeah. Sure.
Just listen. Nothing
Yeah.
else. Just listen.
Just listen and take it as a data point, right? I mean, because it's
Right.
like in some cases better to know that now than after we launch this thing or bring in this new partner or acquire this other business. So sometimes those unexpected to the conversation really save you in the long run.
And then the other benefit with, if you think of inclusion the way I do, especially if you bring less tenured people into your room as a leader, first, they're scared, but they're thrilled. And this is at least my data points. All the people, and people would say,
Sure.
Joe, you brought me in. And, I left the room with a more holistic understanding and a desire to see where I can contribute just beyond my own piece. So now they're going to thrive at a higher, and you get more out of them. It sounds crass,
Yeah.
but they're contributing in a better way. So,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
more
They're
than just great
engaged,
insight.
right?
They're more
They
engaged.
matter. I've heard you say people want to matter, right? Everybody wants to matter. I think that's a universal thing.
I
So
hope so.
yeah, right. And by including them, they're not just, somebody crunching data that no one knows about. If they're invited to the meeting and they can contribute, and what a smart thing to do, right? Because they're the person that's been studying this and could tell us data and insights that we probably weren't thinking about.
I think the other thing interesting just trigger when you said people want to matter. I mean, you could say that, and then you could say, okay, well, that dad matters to his kid, or that spouse matters to the other spouse. But even in business, I think people want to matter, to your point, and it's where we started this whole thing. People need to be and want to be human in their work environment. They want to be recognized. They want to be seen. I mean, and they want to contribute in ways that are positive, which is all mattering. But that word, someone can say, well, what do you mean? They just have a job, do your job. Well, but nowadays people expect more, want more, and the best will contribute more if you actually help them to to know they matter.
To know they matter. Yeah, to create an environment that makes that so obvious to them. You also wrote a chapter on being a generous ally. Tell us about that. How can, because I think a lot of people who are generous leaders think that they're allies, want to be allies, understand the value of having an ally, but I think the way that you're framing it and taking chances on people
But I
is
think that,
really key.
this one I actually learned myself. I mean, I didn't know. People said, you're an action ally. I said, what the heck does that mean? I never heard that word. And so, and this thing is about helping those who, I mean, you could say a mentor and it'd be the same themes, but I'm really talking about helping those who may have less structural disadvantage. We can debate that, but I actually believe some have a structural disadvantage. And there, it's very interesting because you could be, the button wearer, Black Lives Matter month, or, LG, Pride month. Okay, that's nice, but have you really done anything for anybody? Or you might be a performative ally, they call it, which actually is in other books, which is, hey, I've got targets I'm supposed to hit on diversity, I'll hit them. My friends have said, Joe, that's better than nothing. But that's a long ways from, an action ally who really is someone who, works with teams with or works with somebody. And as people said to me, Joe, you help one should open the door for me to walk through and let me deliver. If I fail, so be it. But give me a chance to get in there and fail or not fail. I'm not asking you to do it for me. I'm not asking you to solve it for me, but get me in the room. And then when you're in the room, or through the door, they do say, give me your best 5%. I mean, everybody does, but really give me your good coaching, please. And the
Yes.
other thing I thought was stunning to me was don't run away when times are tough. And I had more friends of mine who said, Joe, so and so, I thought they were an ally or a mentor. But when I was having tough times, they weren't around.
Mm.
Whatever reason, they probably didn't want to risk going down with the person, kind of thing. That
Yeah.
is not really being a true ally. It's really open the door, don't do it for them, give them the coaching, and don't run when times are tough.
Yeah. That's excellent advice. Thank you for sharing that and for checking ourselves on that. I think with the best of intentions, we aspire to be allies and inclusive, and just to check ourselves on some of that criteria and say, how am I doing relative to that? And what difference have I actually made? And how much of my social capital or my political capital have I invested in,
Right, if I truly
put on the line, right? I mean, because sometimes when it's safe, like, is that really being an ally?
it's fine, yeah. No, the other thing, something that people said to me, I thought, is actually also check in with the person you are supporting and check how it's going. We don't
Yeah.
or am I doing the right things for you? Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
don't need all this. I want that.
Yeah.
Now you could do that when you're coaching, mentoring, or whatever. But it's quite interesting. I don't think all of us might check in enough. Which, are you getting what I'm trying to help? Are you getting what you need?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah,
we don't
that
want to hear
willingness
the
to
answer.
listen
We don't
again.
want to get the answer. Maybe I don't like the answer, so we don't have. But I don't know.
We wanna hear, of course.
Or it's back to your time points. Everyone just says,
Yeah. Well, that leads to another thing that you write about is development, being a generous development leader or somebody who develops others. I mean, you talk about how to validate people's strengths and invest in them. I mean, that's another thing that shows up on engagement surveys and employee surveys, is that people want better communication and they want to grow. They want to be developed somehow. So talk to us about generous development.
yeah. And this is when I'll start by saying, generous development does not necessarily mean just being nice. Someone said to me, well, Joe, you can know to be pretty tough and pretty direct and pretty harsh. I said, well, maybe, except it's all about you being better. That's all
Mhm.
I care about. And as long as the person's coming from that place of care, and I'll tell a quick little story.
Yeah.
Started off at Procter and Gamble as a sales rep, got promoted, to sales leader, sales manager. I had 3 reps. They were career reps, meaning all they were going to do was sell shampoo and toothpaste. And I would ride with, and they were in my mind really old. They were 40 maybe. I was 25, but I was scared of them. I was scared, and I'd ride with them every 2 weeks and didn't get much feedback because who am I to tell them? They've been doing this 20 years or 15 years.
Yeah.
The one person I was wrote his review out at the end of the year and put everything in there. He didn't do the way he's supposed to or as well as he could have. And I started reading that review. My boss was in the room. And about 4 or 5 minutes in, his name was Rich. He said, Joe, you ride with me every 2 weeks and I've never heard any of this. So the developer side of Joe Davis or the manager side of just went AWOL, just disappeared. And when he walked out, my boss said, never write a review again where they don't know every idea or concept that you're going to put on that.
Mm.
And ideally, there's an obvious message there. Tell them in the moment, at the time, directly if you have to. But you've got it. But it all has to start when you start there with strengths, and has to start with a recognition of the person and a relationship that you're out to make them better. Which means you
Right.
do have to understand what they're really good at, and not just ignore, and understand where the development areas are, and marry the two and help push people. But I think there is something very important in here, which is you got to earn the right, but then you have to be direct and
Mhm.
clear, etc. And that takes time. Or I mean, over time, if you practice a lot, it's easy, but it takes time,
Yeah,
and it takes time to think about what is this person good at and all that. But again, I would say the manager, that is their job, isn't it?
for sure. Yes, and it's courageous. I think it requires courage, and I do think that most people want to help other people, but they don't really wanna be uncomfortable. And they don't want to have that awkward feeling like they're criticizing someone or somehow maybe creating a rift in the relationship. So I think that is a helpful thing to hear you talk about, and also to marry up with early on in your introduction when I was talking about that review that you received. that you were told that you could get along with anyone. So I'm wondering, how did you modify your feedback going forward? Because it sounds like you decided from that day forward, I'm going to
Well,
be great at this,
well,
right?
yeah. It's funny because that day forward, there's many things that happen when you're young that kind of seep into your body. You don't really know. So I'm sure I wasn't great the next day because you
No,
said
but
one thing, which is fear. I mean,
hmm
fear is a big problem on feedback. And
yeah,
it could either be fear, it's uncomfortable, I don't want to tell you, you'll be mad at me, or fear of, wow, if I tell you that, you might start trashing me just
hmm
tit for tat. But all that isn't. If you start with really caring about the person, whatever that means, you don't have to care about them like you do your child, but caring about them and comparing about them getting better, and you let them know that, there's a lot of freedom to be direct and you can be wrong sometimes. Well, I didn't think, oh, you're right. You can have an engaged conversation.
yeah,
So it starts with, this heart or generosity point.
hmm
But then I think, I've had a colleague in a different office once, and he said, "You two in the office I was running was you guys tell people directly if they're doing very well, and you let them." And he said, "I just kind of let people figure it out and go away. I don't know which is kinder. I know what I think is kinder. I think it's kinder to say,
yeah,
hey, Shannon, you should work on this and this, and if you work on it, you'll be great. Versus, I'm not sure. Maybe work
hmm
on these things, and then 6 months later, you say, how come I lost my job? Well, so I actually find being fearful, not being direct, is actually, I won't use the word mean, but it's not very, they're not kind. It's not really caring about your people. I mean,
no,
it's just
it's
rude.
not, especially if you're in a conversation where that individual is not in the room, but people are talking about that individual. And some of these opportunities are known, or at least the perception of those opportunities is known. If that person isn't aware of that and is doing
Really
their
not.
best, like, that's horrible, right? I
So,
mean, it's so not generous.
but this
So
is one that takes, it takes practice. It takes time.
yeah,
Fortunately, it does a little bit take aging, wisdom or whatever. I mean, I wish at 24, but my 25-year-old was scared to death to do that.
right.
It was only fear. There's nothing else in my way. I was just,
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
and
Yeah, and then when you practice it and you see how receptive people are and how that feedback genuinely helps them, like it really strengthens them in a way that they could not have seen otherwise. I think very often it's just like we're not aware. I don't think anybody's trying to, you know, excuse the word, but suck on purpose. I think people are just doing things that aren't great and nobody's made them aware.
yeah, I mean, there is a flip side of this too, which is, we're talking about the leader, but in this topic, people have to be gracious back to say, okay, let me listen to the input, let me listen to what they're saying, and and then you have to be a little bit confident enough to find the kernels in there. I mean, that story you mentioned, what happened in that situation, the the guy, my boss said, hey Joe, if I put you in a room, four white walls, and give you a tough problem, this other person a tough problem, and say you can't come out if you don't solve it, unless you solve it, you probably never get out of the room. This other guy will get out of the room every time. However, when you're out and now you go get it done with people, you'll get it done 100% of the time. That other person will never get it done because he doesn't team with people, collaborate, all those things you mentioned. He doesn't understand what he or she doesn't know. So
Yeah,
I could have been demoralized by that, probably was a little bit, but I also said, okay, there's a kernel of I surround myself with people who shore up my weaknesses, and that's part of what will make me successful. It's still kind of tough feedback, but I had, but even no
yeah,
matter what, even the receiver has to spend the time to look for, okay, what are they telling me that I can really leverage and drive? And that one, he would give
mhm,
me a great example of the strength and then saying, use that strength to,
sure.
that I'm not going to change how smart I am. That is only what it is.
hmm Yeah. Do you remember what you did? How did you remedy that?
Well, I was Well, the solving the analytical problem out of the room, I could no, but I was a master at surrounding myself who were very good at what I wasn't. I mean, BCG's, the consulting firms, a lot of young, very, very smart people. I would always find the smartest 23, or we call them associate, the hardest associate, and put them on my team. And I didn't have any qualms asking them to explain this, how's this work? And, I just wasn't now I didn't want, if I was one of these who didn't want someone smarter than me around me, well, I just would have failed. Let's just say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was not afraid to surround myself. And I'm also, I mean, we talked earlier about the inclusiveness. I would go down and say, hey, you did this work. What is it really saying? Explain to me this. somewhere along the way I was willing to, admit I didn't know it myself and,
Sure.
ask for support.
Yeah, but I mean, it's resourceful, right? I mean, that's why teams are so popular because none of us have all of the
All the answers.
components that we need to have the absolute answer or best solve to something. So I think it's resourceful and wise. For those listening who are hearing how relatable you are and how easily you make connections with people, what is some of I mean, if you could analyze yourself, like what are some of the things that you do that enable you to connect with people as well as you do?
That's a very personal question. I mean, a good one. Well, I mean, I think I do very consciously think all the time, what's on Shannon's mind? Where's Shannon coming from? What's Shannon? Not once sounds hard, but I really spend and that was training from BCG. I mean, we write slide decks, one of the things, and we could present them. I had a boss who was so good at, Joe, you wrote these words, but how do you think, Sally, the vice president of merchandise, is going to hear those words? Well, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but is that what you meant to say? No. Well, your words aren't right. So, but his lens was, what are they going, it's the same thing as Joaquin.
Yes.
What are they going to hear? And so understand where they're coming from, understand their situation. So I do think I'm constantly processing, where are you coming from? What are you asking about? And trying to engage with that. And you probably feel it, I guess, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I also
Yeah,
think
like a genuine connection, like really
one-
listening, seeking to understand and not trying to get enough data to, suck it to them or, get
yeah.
the win. It's more like that genuine desire to
Well,
understand and connect.
I always believe that everybody I'm engaged with knows something that I don't know, that if I knew it, the two together would be better. I just believe that. So
Mhm.
come to however you get to where I was, but I believe that. Therefore, everybody has something interesting to add. And maybe it's not relevant that moment, but so that's another just process for me. Yeah. My wife her mom had a very good friend who this woman who just loved being around her. And my mother-in-law said, well, yeah, but watch what she does. All she does is ask you questions about you. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. Now, in business, you can't just do it, but it's the same kind of attitude. Let me
Same attitude. Yeah.
ask questions of you. You'll
Hmm.
feel great. I'll learn something. If they're off point, then why am I wasting the time? I should ask questions that are relevant to, you know, I'll say Google did a study with their 80,000 managers, which is interesting in itself,
Yeah.
called the Project Oxygen. And what the best managers were really great coaches. How were they really great coaches? They engaged, and at the core, they asked questions and they listened. That's what, of the 80,000, that was the underpinning. They asked questions and they listened. That is not that hard, but you got to get out of your own head. You can't believe your analysis is perfect or the data you've
Hmm.
collected so far, which is hard, if you have a belief of the world I'm starting to think about our world today and, what is true data and what's not. I mean, I won't go there, but, you really spend the time to understand where is everybody else? What do they know you don't? You think
Yeah.
that way.
I mean, I think that's humility too,
Well,
what
yeah.
I'm hearing and what you're saying, right? Because
Well,
it's
yeah.
like not to say I've heard the definition of humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less, right? So like you're not the center of everything, but it's not that you're saying you're not worthy or you're not enough. You're just saying I'm curious to hear more. I'm open to being wrong. I'm open to expanding my thinking on this. I think
Yeah.
that's a
No, I
great
agree. I
way to
think
be
that's great.
generous.
Well, if you even go, and I'm sure you're going to get there, but humility, then you can say you're humble, which then, quite frankly, you're saying you're vulnerable. And
Hmm.
they're, oh, vulnerable. Oh, I have to cry in front of everybody. No, being vulnerable is saying, wow, you know something I don't know. I just admitted a vulnerability, which is I don't know. That's a simple, I don't know is a very simple vulnerability that can start people down a path. And that's really what we're talking. I mean,
Yeah.
be real, but then you got to be willing to expose your own weaknesses or your own insecurity is a big word, lack of, not really being sure. And
Yeah.
that enables you to be humble, which enables you to be human, and enables you to ask a question,
Hmm.
hey, how come you know that and I don't? Whoa, what's wrong with you? Someone could think, as opposed to, well,
Yeah.
thank you for helping me.
Right. Right. I mean, I think this is the last chapter of your book where you talk about give up the mask. And that's what it is. It's a mask. It's a mask of, I don't know, perfection or enoughness or, I don't know, gravitas. Sometimes people would describe it as. And you're suggesting that as a generous leader, we need to be more authentic, more vulnerable, more empathetic, you know. So for people hearing that, they're like, "Okay, intellectually, I get this, but I don't feel comfortable doing that." Like what advice do you have? One of them you just said, just say you don't know
Yeah,
when
well,
you don't.
yeah. The first thing you said it, but do remember if you can share a little vulnerability, you free others who are frozen or stuck to share theirs and get past the roadblocks. And if your goal as a leader is to get people to move forward, because then you get business moves forward, your organization moves forward, you get promoted, or whatever you want, you have to help them unlock too. Now, a quick story. A friend of mine said I said, well, what's some of your vulnerabilities? He said, well, I'm afraid I just would not say I don't know. And if a team was meeting and I was in the room and I could tell they're going to get stuck and they're going to turn to me, before I would get the question that I have to say, I don't know, I'd leave the room. I know. I was like, how is that for productive? So now,
Wow.
and he said, one day I thought, because he was so afraid to admit he didn't know. And so one day I just said, I don't know. It took a chance. I don't know either. And the whole room, like this energy goes up. You don't know? Oh, we don't know. And the creativity started, it was
Yeah.
incredible. So and that's why I say take off the mask or, decide where you cross your own line. I mean, I will say I'm white, male, 60 plus, ran North America. I could cry on this screen. Nobody would care. It wouldn't hurt me. You know what I mean? Now I get it. If you're 33-year-old female, black woman, just getting going, maybe you don't cry as quickly as I do, but you still have to show your version of I don't know. And I have a couple pieces of advice. One thing I think is, was as another CEO of an oil company woman told me, Christina, so Joe, I always observe when other leaders are talking, if they're sharing anything personal or anything vulnerable, how do they do it? What's the reaction? I won't do it the way they do, but I really pay attention to the
Mm.
clues of how they made it work. So one is observe. Another one, I think a friend told me is, go back in your life and think about moments where there was real vulnerability and you probably freaked out at that moment, but the fact is you made it through and you're still
Mm.
here. And if you're just so
Yeah, you
that one
survived it.
worked, you survived it. Yeah, so it's actually not, I mean, but if you viscerally remember that thing, so then okay, take one more step over your line. I mean, I I tell I don't tell story, but I think back now over my life, I can be quite vulnerable. I got married when I was 23. My wedding vows, I cried through my whole vows. And I was so embarrassed. White male, 23-year-old. Yeah, I should be a tough guy. This is 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But afterwards, so many people came up. Oh, that was so wonderful. The emotion in the room, the love. Now, I didn't process then the signal that was sending to me. And then 6 years later, my mom died pretty young. I was 30. And then at the church, we were doing, the three brothers were saying a few words. Guess what I did? I just sobbed. And the priest said, Joe, fountains, don't worry, because tears are the fountains of love. So his signals never lost me. And again, guess what? People came up, as opposed to, wow, you couldn't even say a few words about your mom. You had to sob through the whole thing. People came up. So I didn't know it then, but those
Yeah.
moments for me, and I'm sure everybody can think back to, I mean, that was pretty vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it was just like, it was it. I couldn't change
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
But the message to myself, which I didn't get at the time, was wow, share a little emotion, opens others up.
Mm-hmm.
So long story, I tell the story just, but to think back to when you had a vulnerable moment, think about how you passed through and then say, okay, maybe I can step over the line a little bit more. And then a
Yeah.
good friend said to me, you don't have to, jump off the chasm, just step over, take little, say,
Get
I don't
closer.
know, like that one guy said, just say, I don't know, and then
Yeah,
next
right? I mean,
time.
and then the positive reaction from that, and I can only imagine, I'm like in my imagination thinking of you on your wedding day and how that must have made Sarah feel, right? Like for her to know that you love her
Oh, no.
so much. And for
Well,
you to say this, it would just literally, like, I always think of tears as like your heart coming out of your eyes. It's
there you
similar
go.
to what your pastor said. And it's like, how that made her feel, how it made everyone else who is your witnesses there feel, and the love for your mom. And I think those are really great examples of, yeah, could you, and I'm sure, and I've heard you say, like, when you had those moments, you felt like, oh, why can't I just be tough? And yeah, what's wrong with me? But then you thought it was really of service to other people because you gave them permission to feel what they were feeling.
Yeah, and those are heavier examples, but in the business world, if someone's stuck and you let them know you're stuck too, it's okay to be stuck. I'm not a failure. I'm not a loser. I'm not, how many people just freeze because they don't know where to go? And your other role is to help them unfreeze, and you can't go do the work for them.
Absolutely. And I think we've been talking about this a lot in this conversation, but I know that, working with BCG, one of the greatest consulting firms ever, and working with leaders and these huge organizations. I mean, you've seen a lot, you've interacted with many different kinds of businesses, and you know that people are often recognized and celebrated for their bottom line benefits and their stockholder returns and the funds that are raised. Here we're talking about the return on generosity. I would just love to hear your thoughts on what that means to you.
That's interesting because I've already said that I think the generosity, the way you and I are talking about it, does actually drive to those business outcomes. But
Yeah.
the way you just said return on generosity, I'm going to answer that differently, which is actually your life is more fun and more pleasant and more enjoyable too. I mean, really, and you connected with more people, and
Yeah.
that's a great thing. I think, yeah, I mean, that's what I would say, just your ability to connect more and get the rewards of that on
Yeah.
top of the business thing are very meaningful in there. I mean, I
Yeah.
look back at BCG's, it's all a bunch of talented people and all that, but I feel like, wow, I made a difference. And I know there's different ways to make a difference, but the things that make me feel most great is if someone sends me a note 25 years later and said, Joe, I had this role and this role now, and at one point you gave me this counsel, and it was tough to hear you, but boom, and I thought, okay, I moved that person, and that means a lot later on. I mean, BCG can do well, I could do well, but knowing I moved some people, that sticks with you.
That's it, right? That's legacy, right? That's like I actually made a difference in a way because you think about the people whose lives that individual
Right.
impacts.
Well, that's yes.
If you even just think about that compounding ripple effect, it's kind of amazing, really. So it's worth it, and it just feels good. I love what you said. It's just fun. It's energizing.
When you asked that question, I thought, wow, I can say business is good, but actually, you feel good, and that's
Yeah,
what it's all
exactly. I mean, it's selfish a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Because
well,
I
or
just
not
think,
even because then it translates to your children, translates to
yeah,
your relationships. It translates positively, probably to your health, to the
everywhere.
immune system in there. I mean, I can go on and on, probably.
For sure.
You know?
Yes, it's like gratitude, right? There is
Yeah,
like
right,
scientific research to back us up on this that it is good for us
right,
to be
right.
generous. And it feels good. So why not? Right. So here's a couple of things that you said, and then anything else that we didn't catch, I'd love for you to add. So you talked about, so we call these R.O.G takeaway tips because not everyone will have your exact career path, but they could take some of the pages out of your book, those success cues that you're giving us. So give freely. Like I loved your definition of generosity. It's giving freely, like there's no strings attached. You talked about generous communication and primarily listening, like really seek to understand where is this person coming from. You talked about connecting personally and deeply, like back to the asking the questions, listening, like just I'm so curious to know more about you type of thing. Use group testing and personal testing. That was such great insight, right? Just to practice the messaging. What did you hear? Was this what I meant to say? You talked about learn how to use the tools most common in your environment, like Slack. So, it's like Maria Brennan once said to me, she said, if you can't get out of it, get into it.
Well,
So,
I should have said it that way. That's very clever.
you said be an action ally. So work with someone, open the doors for them. And then I loved when you said check in with them. Like, is this helping? Is this a way that I could be most valuable to you? Help people to be better through development and feedback and coaching. Think about the other person. Everyone knows something that I don't know. So seek to find it. And then the being real and admitting you don't know. Those are some of the key takeaway tips. Anything else you'd want to add to that?
No, well, sure. I just think, underpinning that, whatever the word care means to all of you, if you actually, this is the giving freely, if you really do believe you care about the other person getting to the best they can be, it all comes naturally. And then I will say, never forget to do it with the highest level of integrity, which of course probably goes hand in hand, but this is fundamental. If the integrity isn't there, this all collapses.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing this wisdom with us and for investing your valuable time. You've so deeply touched us and given us some practical advice and inspiration. I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you. It was a great fun and good experience.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G. Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.